I'm Aaron Ryan. I'm joined by two icons in the WA media industry, simply known in Perth as Rick and Sue. Yes, I'm talking 7 News Perth presenters Rick Ardon and Susannah Carr, who this month celebrated 37 years reading the news together, a world record, and now it's absolutely official. Rick and Sue, thank you for agreeing to chat to me today. We will get to the Guinness World Records, but first, congratulations on 37 years.
Thank you. How did it ever happen?
So the official Guinness World Records was made quite some time ago, but it takes a bit of work to make it official. It's now certified. Sue, I'll start with you and ask if these sort of milestones are significant for you. I mean, 37 years is a world record, obviously not far off the 40. Is there a goal in terms of how long you will serve, or don't you read into these milestones too much, but it's a bit of a fun, positive side note?
It's definitely a fun positive, and I think we both said to each other, let's go for the 40. So
do that easily.
That's an easy one, but that's certainly the next one that we will go for. And why not? You know, if you're both enjoying it, and you know, it's a triple positive. If we're happy, the station's happy, and the public are happy, why not keep going?
Of course. Look, I mentioned that the milestone had passed some time ago. It's not an easy thing for the Guinness to call, you know, for you to just call up and say, we've reached the record. There's a lot to go through. Can you tell me about this process, and how gorgeous are your mums for scrapbooking? They were quite the historians through the process.
Well, they were the key to it, Aaron, really, because as Sue will tell you, the Guinness World Record people wanted a lot of detail, including proof that we had done what we have done. So our mums, and Sue will tell you this too, have kept every piece of news that's been published and all sorts of clippings. And so they actually helped the process because we didn't have all that information. And our good old mums, they had it in the bottom drawer and they produced it for us.
We stopped collecting that sort of stuff years ago, but they don't. They just cut everything out and stash it away. And it was quite difficult because the one piece of information that I had was from a magazine called the Western Mail, which has long been defunct. That was Robert Holmes-a-Court's newspaper. And it was an article that that was in print the weekend before we started as a news reading team back in January 1985. And there's a picture, there's the announcement, and there's no date on the page. So, it was completely useless because it couldn't prove what we were saying, even though it was there. And there's no record of the Western Mail anymore. Trying to find some details in the library, it's not there. There's just so much stuff that goes missing. And the other thing that we mentioned this morning too on Sunrise was that so much was recorded on videotape that got used over and over and over again. And so things just didn't get put away and stored as you'd hope they would. And then we moved station, a lot of stuff was turfed out, and it really became more difficult than we'd ever realised. And it's much easier if you've got a record for blowing 100 million bubblegum bubbles than proving you've read the news for 37 years.
I think the lesson is here, always rely on your mum. So as well.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And they were chuffed too. They appeared on the news story last night. They did too. And they were both excited. Which we didn't know that one way.
Yeah. Rick, I remember at one point yourself and Sue thought you were the longest serving duo in the world, only to find out that good old Chuck Scarborough and Sue Simmons from NBC in New York were just ahead of you. I mean, Sue subsequently retired, so you guys eventually flew past them, but it must have been a funny moment to know that there was a Chuck and Sue out there doing a long stint like you guys.
It was actually, and I contacted him saying, did you know we're about to surpass your record? And he graciously replied saying, I'm not necessarily over-enthusiastic about it, but well done.
And I think at 78, he's still going, I think.
Yes.
He is. I think he's got a much younger reading partner now. So
yeah, for sure.
Who knows what's going to happen here?
So a lot of people refer to you guys as a television marriage. It certainly has lasted longer than many people's real marriages. Like a real marriage, are there things that you work on to keep it, intact and healthy?
I think we're just so comfortable with each other. It's just easy now. You know, we know how each other is going to react to things. We preempt things. It's amazing how I know that if I'm about to read a story that I'm not supposed to reading, Rick waits for that. If he hears that intake of breath, he jumps in. And I think you sort of get that sixth sense about each other, and so we do cover for each other. Not that we make a huge number of mistakes, I hasten to add, but certainly we can anticipate what's going on, and we sort of cover each other, and we just work well together. It's just so easy.
Yeah, we're very news orientated too, so it's easy. I mean, when you've got the major stories of the day unfolding in front of you, and you're comfortable with your partner sitting right there, you know it's going to be pretty easy.
Look, it's time to go right back for a moment for one question each. We'll start with you, Rick. You must have been about 18 when you started as a cadet journalist at the West Australian. 1978, you joined Channel 7. As a child, were you... Yeah. As a child, were you always interested in being a journalist and were writing a lot as a kid, and this was just a predestined thing for you? Or did you actually want to be a football star or a policeman, and there was a big event that changed all that?
Well, perhaps it was predestined, but I didn't know that. My mum had more of an idea than me. Good old mum again, because I was always good at school at English, literature and English. So I loved writing and creative writing. So I applied for a job at the West Australian, and they told me that there was an intake that year of 10 cadets. There were 400 applicants. And they wrote me a letter saying, sorry, you've just missed out, which I thought is what they said to 390 people who missed out. But 2 weeks later, I got a phone call saying you were actually 12th. 2 people have decided to do something else. Do you want to squeeze in? I said, yes, please. And took it like a duck in water. And after 18 months, realised that younger journalists were getting more opportunities in TV than the long progression in newspapers of getting to the top, covering the major stories. So I applied for a job at Channel 7 and very fortunately got a job here.
Well, Sue, I don't think it was the same story for you. You started at the ABC. But you at about 22 years old, but before that you had studied architecture. So as you were leaving high school, where did you think your life might take you, and when did all that change?
Well, from about 13, I was always going to be an architect, and the nuns at my school always used to joke about how I'd come back and design the buildings free for them. Nuns always on the lookout for someone to help them out in the future.
For charity, perhaps.
That was the plan entirely, and it was thwarted a bit by the Dean of Architecture at UWA, who really didn't like women coming to study there. He was quite misogynistic, so I went through architecture in a different way to get there. And then one day I still to this day don't know why I did it, but I looked at an advertisement in the paper advertising for radio announcers at the ABC. And I used to babysit for a guy called Tony Evans, who was the compere of This Day Tonight, which was the ABC's current affairs program. And I remember going down to see him and saying, what do you think? And he said, well, you know, you like debating, you're good at speech and drama, and you've got reasonable knowledge of all sorts of things, go for it. So I did, and that was how I ended up at the ABC. So the architecture went out the window, and broadcasting came in just a flash. And it was really strange, because to change your mind like that without any sort of preconceived ideas of where you were going was really odd, but fate dealt me a kind hand.
Well, I read that 2 weeks into your job at the ABC, you were covering Cyclone Tracy. You're so obviously right in the deep end. I imagine that's something like that would make an impact on you. That was your taste for journalism. Was that a never look back moment for you?
I think it probably was, because it was so dramatic. As you know, it was Christmas Day, and that I started work, I think, at the very beginning of December. So you're right, it was only a couple of weeks later. And because I was the newbie, I was the one who drew the shift of working on Christmas Day. So that's what happened. It wasn't as easy as you'd imagine, though, because I remember being a little bit dubious about my career at one point. I really was not sure that I was in the right area for my talents, and maybe I should go back to architecture. I just struggled there for a little while. And then I just had one of those aha moments where everything seemed to sort of fall into place. And after that, it just became totally enjoyable. And I think because I was the only girl there were 18 announcers. I was the only female. women just weren't broadcasting much at that point, and I suppose everyone was being very supportive and very helpful, but you do go through those points of self doubt, and once you get past that, there's no stopping you.
Well, Rick, unless I'm wrong, I believe it was you that sort of coaxed Sue to Channel 7 from the ABC. Was a difficult sell, lots of ushering?
No, it wasn't actually me. It was
Oh,
our former weather presenter, Jeff Newman,
oh, Jeff,
who
that's, yeah.
would be a perfect fit. But I'd seen Sue that we used to have these clear speech awards, and I'd always admired her because she's got this beautiful, mellifluous voice, as you know, and this warmth on the camera. So when Jeff said, "Look, I'm trying to get Sue across," I thought, what a great idea.
Well, so when you made that decision to come to Seven, obviously you could not have thought this was going to be continue for nearly 40 years. What were your thoughts at the time? Accept the offer, maybe do a few offers and see what happens, or were you potentially hoping that you could still be presenting the news of Perth to the audience 37 years later?
I probably had no concept of where it was going to go. And I know that when Seven asked me to join them, I was at a real crossroads at the ABC because the ABC had gone into a new program called The National. Well, they were about to go into this program called The National that was going to air at 6:30, which was going to be a mix of news and current affairs. And I really thought it was quite ill-fated. And although I was supposed to be one of the hosts of it, I didn't really believe in it. And when Seven asked me to come over, it just seemed to make all the right sense. I'd been at the ABC for 10 years. It was time for a move, time to do something more challenging. And I think I know I made the right decision in so many ways because the National only lasted, I think, a year and then fell apart. And I was on my path here. And then Rick and I read with another newsreader called Peter Walton after a couple of years. After Channel 9 tried to poach Rick and me.
That's a good story too.
That's a good story. Peter ended up going to 9. We ended up staying here because I remember Rick and I saying to each other, why would we leave 7? It's so good. We really enjoy working. And yeah, here we are. All these years later, it did work.
Oh, beautiful! I'm glad I'm glad you went with 7. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Um, as a Perth person myself, having grown up watching you guys, there is an element of trust. At one point, it was a decision to select 7 News as my viewing choice, but over time, it has built trust. And now, if I want to have a full understanding of a situation, I trust Rick and Sue to give me accurate information on what's happening around me. Many people of Perth would be the same. How do you feel about them? Well, basically, it is the majority of Perth selecting yourselves and the team at 7 as the most credible news source to understand what's happening in the city of Perth. I mean, is it a privilege?
Absolutely. I think it's a natural fit that people do watch us because we do strive to give people 100% accurate news all the time and let people decide for themselves what they want to think about what we've presented. We don't ever and have never presented anything that is not 100% true that we know of course. So, all the time, as a journalist, I grew up with a code of ethics and it's like almost the 10 commandments. So, and that's very important. It's not something just to adhere to because you were taught that. It's a case of honesty and decency and credibility and telling people this is what's happened today. We're striving to give you the best news in Perth and we're thanking you at the same time for watching us.
And I think with longevity, you get credibility too, because you are there to cover the stories. People remember us, but they remember main stories, but they remember us covering them. And so you get that switch on effect when a major story happens and a major story breaks. And so we definitely do get that response from the audience, which we're grateful for. But also, you look at other stations and the personnel have changed so many times. It's hard to form a connection with people when you know that they may not be there that long.
Look, I know you guys don't, and you haven't done a lot of boasting in your time, but you do have an incredible team around you as well. But there's no doubt that there is the Sue and Rick effect on the nightly ratings. Why do you think the audience connect with you? Is it longevity, credibility, integrity, community work through telethon, chemistry, or did I just name all of the above?
I hope you're right, because I mean, I hope it is all of those
Yeah, and I
things.
think you hit the nail on the head there, Aaron. Look, we are the community station. We have been here longest in Western Australia, as in Channel 7. You know, we've got Telephone, which is a wonderful community outpouring of generosity and giving. You know, we've got the Christmas pageant, we've got AFL footy, which people in Western Australia love. So, and we've got the best news team. Honestly, you get investigative reporters like Jeff Parry and Jessica Page. We'll go to a media conference, and I'm sure that politicians quaking their shoes
Yeah.
at boots have something to hide, perhaps. You know, all of those factors, I think, combine to give us that boost over other years.
And it's a very dynamic team too. They give their all. I mean, when something happens here, the number of people who turn up at the station on their days off, on their holidays to pitch in, it's just the contribution level is huge.
Yeah. Look, just one, this is a pretty light podcast, but just sort of, I guess, one difficult question. Rick, I want to take you to a difficult moment for you on air, and I apologise for doing so, but it was significant. Now, there was the passing of Chris Mainwaring, West Coast Eagles legend, Seven Sport presenter and all-round nice guy, a mate and colleague of yours as well. That on-air moment you had, it's something I remember significantly and was quite impactful. I mean, how was it being on air and going through the emotions you were going through at the time?
Oh, very emotional because Chris Manwaring was a friend of ours, you know, a workmate of ours. He was a lovely guy. He'd been struggling a bit, so much so that during the week before he died, he was reading the sporting news next to us, filling in for the weeknight sporting presenter because he was our weekend sporting presenter. And Suze kept me saying something like, "We can make he's okay," because he seemed to be struggling a little. But you know, the circumstances behind his death were something that you know were very unfortunate. I remember I was playing football in Sydney for a WA senior side of them at the time. In those days, you didn't receive that many text messages, but I came back to the house I was staying at, and I had something like 20 messages, and I couldn't believe it. So at the time, it was very emotional. Chris was, as I said, a lovely guy, and it was just tragic with that.
And Sue, I just wanted to ask you, we've had some truly heartbreaking stories in Perth. I mean, one that just comes to mind for me was that 8-year-old girl, Sophia, that she was raped and murdered in a Canning Vale shopping centre. I so remember that news report. So much sadness and anger filled the people of Perth. I'm just wondering how you get into that headspace to present a story like that. I mean, we don't have to talk about that particular story, but you have to remain obviously composed and professional. I mean, how do you get into that headspace?
Well, the only thing that I can say is when you have a story that's as distressing as that, you have to make yourself as familiar with it as possible, because if you go in unprepared, the emotions just flow, and they often do anyway. No matter how many times you prepare yourself for something, your tears can well up in your eyes. And I suppose what I think is that if that's happening to me, it's happening to people at home. So
Mm.
you know, not to be afraid of it. I mean, nobody wants a newsreader who's going to over emote all the time and be, you know, hysterical one minute and weeping the next. But if something gets to you at the core of you, then it's going to get to other people as well. So you're probably sharing the experience.
Yeah. Rick, when a major story breaks, you're often first on the scene and doing live crosses for the 6 p.m. bulletin. I mean, Sue has as well, of course. There are obviously different days to straight presenting. The stories are often tragic, but do you still, like, I guess, enjoy getting out on the road and being that connection to what's unfolding and then straight to the viewer?
Yeah, I love it. I'm a journalist, trained as a journalist, and I just love getting out on the road. I love it when we get there first. I'm very competitive, as anyone here will tell you too. So, for example, when Claire Smith was found, we were straight up on a charter plane to Carnarvon. You know, by that night we had videotape of an arrest that we found no one else had found. We had a witness to the arrest, and you know, I just love being there. We went around and got another exclusive with a relative of the accused, and you know, I actually shot the pictures for our journalist Joe Catanzaro. So you know, I just love all facets of news gathering, being there, getting there first, getting the information, and bringing it back to the people.
Well, Sue, one of
Very
you... Oh, sorry.
gets to the front all the time.
Well, Sue, a highlight though in terms of your reporting is the Lint Cafe siege. Now, due to the events unfolding outside the Sydney studio in Martin Place, they had to cut their presenting. And for a period of time, the national feed was coming from Perth with yourself on rolling coverage. After 30 years, I guess, at the time, was the heart still pounding a little bit because of the importance of the presentation and the live events unfolding? Or does the 30 plus years of experience at the time just kick into gear and it's, I suppose, less nerve-wracking?
I have to say the adrenaline was absolutely surging through me that
Oh,
night, because
wow.
that was one of the most astonishing stories. When you do something that's out of the ordinary like that, and particularly if it's live, I mean, as tragic as it was an incredibly challenging and intriguing and amazing story to cover. And I worked with Chris Reason and Sean Berry, and Chris was amazed. But they both were amazing, actually. But what we were doing was working between the three of us, describing. I could see what they couldn't see, and so I was keeping them informed. And it really was something that I mean, it went for about 3 hours, I think, and.
Yeah.
It's the sort of thing that a broadcaster dreams of doing in many ways. As I said, aside from the tragedy of the situation, the challenge of it is huge, and it's quite exhilarating to do that. And if you manage to do it reasonably well, you feel very satisfied at the end. It was an astonishing experience.
And can I just say to Aaron that Sue did it so professionally and so perfectly. The reporters there couldn't see the pictures that were going to air, so Sue was talking over the top, seeing the pictures coming in and going up live on air and helping guide the two reporters to what was happening while she was live on air.
Yeah, it was extraordinary. I was there watching the 3 hours with you on air. It was wow, what a moment. Look, it's easy to ask the most impactful story that you've experienced. I mean, 9/11, Princess Diana. There's probably a handful of stories, but let me ask you instead the stories that you remembered the most. I mean, perhaps it's the Eagles winning the grand final, or the Lint Cafe siege, or something like that. What do you remember the most?
I think we both say it's
Oh,
9/11
9/11
without a
any doubt.
doubt, because of the drama of the situation and the world changingness of the whole thing too, and the fact that we were all at home. And what most people don't realize is that that night, all of our management were in a focal group, a focus group, and so
Couldn't be contacted.
they were in lockdown. They had no phones with them. We couldn't contact them. We were all at home. We'd gone home to our various homes, and we were in contact with each other as we realized what was going on, because at that point you sort of flicking around the television thinking some sort of a movie was on, and it suddenly became obvious what was really happening. And so everybody just charged back into the studio with the full expectation that they would just be there indefinitely, which we were.
Yeah.
And it really was astonishing. And I mean, in terms of numbers of people dying and everything, there are things way more dramatic, but in terms of pictures and never having seen anything like this before, it was world shattering.
Just being live on air after having seen, the first plane go into the first tower, then on the way hearing another plane go in, and being on air as the towers are actually crumbling. And I'll never forget seeing what they call the falling man, people just jumping off the buildings to their death rather than being burnt alive. But to see those towers crumbling while you're on air live broadcasting was just incredible and unforgettable.
And we were only saying the other day, can you imagine what it would have been like if everybody had iPhones then? I mean, we're only talking 20 years ago, but we didn't have iPhones and Androids then. And if everybody had an iPhone, the amount of vision available would have been huge.
Yeah.
And as it is now, there are certain iconic pictures and certain bits of footage that just depict the whole thing. But so that was probably the last major event that isn't covered to the degree that things are now, because everybody's a cameraman now.
Yeah, it was such an extraordinary moment. I remember I was actually in bed at the time, and my nana called me up and sort of said, I think something's going on, and had switched on the news there. And I just said, I just went to her, Nana, you're actually watching a movie. It just didn't look like it.
Yeah.
No.
It was extraordinary.
It was incredible, wasn't it? In the true sense of the word.
Well, let's talk about the Perth market. I mean, Perth is a small city. We're a one newspaper town. We have a significantly leading TV news service, and often we do things differently to the rest of Australia. Obviously, the way we're handling COVID is different. I suppose from a media perspective, but also holistically, why do you think WA is so unique?
Our isolation, I suppose. I mean, we're the most isolated city in the most isolated country of the world.
And look, we're blessed to be where we are. We really are, despite the politics of, hard borders. You look around the world, it's great traveling, of course, but living here is just wonderful. Sure, it's a bit like a goldfish bowl sometimes for us because, for example, my sister comes, when she could come across from Sydney, would occasionally say, look, you see someone on the news in the street in Sydney, it doesn't matter because there are so many politicians, actors, singers, famous people in Sydney that none of that's an island. But here it's a little different. But having said that, most people here have that laid-back attitude anyway, so people are friendly.
Well, Perth is small, and the media circle, of course, is quite small. You obviously have worked very hard to be number one, and I'm sure you want Seven News and Seven itself to be number one ongoing. But then you see someone like, I'm just thinking Monica Koss, who was with you for around, well, more than 20 years with Today Tonight. She's now doing a fabulous job at 9, presenting the 5 p.m. bulletin. Is it sort of mixed emotions rooting for someone that was part of the Seven team for so long and you want to do well, and then also realising they're part of the direct competition? I seem to get in my mind it's probably like the Williams sisters playing, so that, there is competition, but there's also, a love for each other.
Yeah, well, we do know each other, and particularly when you've worked with someone like we've worked with Mon for so many years, and when Today Tonight finished and Mon got the job at Channel 10, we were all thrilled for her because we knew it was such a waste her not working, and then when 10 folded as well with their Perth offices, and then she got the job at 9, it was like, yes, go for it, Mon, thrilled.
And her husband works in our newsroom too as a chief of staff on weekends too. So, it's still very much a case of while you're competitive, you're also friendly.
Oh, it's beautiful. Look, a couple of fun questions now. Let's go to the bloopers. Few and far in between. You guys have been tremendously lucky in terms of stuff that go to air. Two that I remember is once you guys were you threw to Monica for Today Tonight, and then nothing happened.
Moving camera, robotic camera.
And then the camera went all over the place. And I think it was Australia Day weekend. You went from the weather, and then it went back to you guys, and then there was a big pause, and then you just went along. What are your memories of some of the squirmish moments on air?
Oh, they're good fun. I think people love them. We actually enjoy them. Of course, we would never do anything deliberately like that, but when they happen, you just have a chuckle and move on.
I remember years ago too, when we had our first experience with robotic cameras in the early days at the old Channel 7. Yes. And I remember one day Dennis was sitting there and the camera came into zoom and it just kept coming.
Towards him. When he hit the news
crashed
desk.
into the news desk. This is the thing you get with robotic cameras. I mean, they do have a bit of a mind of their own sometimes. And the studio is much less populated than it used to be. We used to have floor managers and cameramen and things didn't happen in those days. But now we're sort of sitting there just with an auto cue person and everything's done in our ear, and it's much more sort of remote.
Well, let's go to the two items that people have always wondered about newsreaders. So here comes the hard-hitting questions.
Oh, what do you wear on the bottom half?
That's the first question. No. Rick, do you sometimes have the shorts on underneath?
No, never. But when I first started as weekend newsreader, I'd come in a little casually. And I remember one weekend, it was summer, and I was wearing a pair of red shorts, and someone said, the boss is coming. I thought, oh, no. But funnily enough, he had red shorts on too, so it was okay.
I'm pretty sure I saw an interview. Either Barra or Baz have done the shorts underneath the desk before. I'm sure I saw that somewhere, but
I think on weekends and public holidays it can be pretty much open slather.
Yeah, we're pretty casual.
Well, let me try the other one. At the start of the bulletin, there's obviously a voiceover intro and a wide shot, and you guys could be seen having a quick chat before being on air. Every duo newsreader do it. Some people think that it's fake conversation. What are you guys talking about 5 seconds before you go to air?
No, it's real. All I say is beware the lip readers.
Yes.
So it's real.
Ah.
We've learned a few lessons about things recently, as you can imagine, about hot mics and lip readers and all sorts of things. You've got to be pretty careful these days what you say.
Yeah, for example, the lead might be a sad story. We'll actually say this is a really sad story, that sort of thing like that. And away we go to start the bulletin.
Yeah.
Look, a couple of personal questions. Sue, what do you like doing in your spare time? And I know you make a great trifle. I copied your recipe from today tonight once. What hobbies or interests and family do you do away from the music?
So yeah, I'm a passionate cook. I read a lot. I ride my bike. I swim regularly. I walk most days, and I love traveling and architecture. And I like going to places that are a bit off the beaten track, particularly with interesting buildings and good history.
And
That's
making
me.
great trifles.
And I haven't made one for a while. I think I made too many after I did. I made one for the Christmas message, and then tonight, and I think we had a little break from them for a while.
And what about you, Rick?
Oh, look, I love travel. I'm very similar to Sue in some ways and different in other ways too. I just love travel. I love getting away. For example, on the weekend, I went to a place I've never been to before, and that was Logbrook Dam. So, I know a lot of people have been to a lot of these places, but I like the deep south too. I love surfing. Dislocated my shoulder at a place called Three Bears near Yelling in January on a big wave, but that's part of it, I guess. I just love surfing. I love the almost spiritual experience of being in a remote place, sliding down the face of the big wave. It's great. I also love reading. I love knowing what's going on around the world, and I love people watching, especially when I'm away from home and people don't have that recognition factor. Meeting people, I love Italy and France, for example, and I will go and try to speak my limited Italian in the town square with a group of old gents who are waving their hands around and just love it.
Well, actually, speaking of like recognition, so when you do go to Coles and Woolies, do you actually do you sort of get harassed or just people saying, hello, you're doing a great job? Is there a lot of recognition when you go out to the shops?
It's all of those things. I think if you shop in the same area, you don't get it so much. Sometimes you get the odd unusual person who lives in the area who's a bit eccentric, who sort of follows you around the supermarket and accosts you and demands to know about your dog and things like that. And then you get other people who look in your trolley to see what you've bought.
Oh, what does
Which is
Susannah
really
Carr
weird,
buy?
so they can go and tell people what you've bought, and, is it healthy? Is it not? Is it junk food? What is it? It's quite interesting. Mostly people are pretty nice, though. I'd say 95% of people are pretty nice, and just the odd one is weird.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you hear all sorts of rumours. For example, I was having a chuckle. We were on the news last night with our mums, and my daughters were over, and then the story had been done in the Sunday Times, which translates to Perth Now Online, and we were just having a big chuckle at all the comments. My daughters were cracking up at all the comments on Perth Now, saying things like, or do you think they go home together, and all sorts of things.
And I love the one that said, there was one I read somewhere that said, oh my gosh, the two of them have had so much plastic surgery they can melt in front of a flame. And I thought that is so funny, because we might be the oldest in the business, but we're probably one of the few people around who's had absolutely zero plastic surgery. And it's funny that people think we have. We've just got kindly cameras and good makeup artists.
And very good lighting.
I guess some people think that. It's just that, because you guys have been around for so long and you see both of you each night, and so it looks like you haven't changed. But if you went away for 3 years and then came back to Perth, you might see change. But because we've been seeing both of you for 37 years, people must think you must have had, I don't know, surgery or something. But
well, not everybody does have plastic surgery, but when you look back at how we looked years gone by.
I had us on Sunrise this morning, for example, and I thought, bloody hell, have a look at those clothes and have a look at those hairstyles. I used to use half a can of hairspray, as Dennis Cometti did on my hair, so my hair always looked a bit slick. And now it's funny because you look back and people say, oh, you must be wearing a wig, that sort of thing, which I find hilarious.
And I had such wide hair at one point that the guys in the control room came to me and said, look, you don't really want to say anything much, but can you bring your hair in a little bit, because the over-the-shoulder pictures are being obliterated by your hair. It just got wider and wider and curlier and more ridiculous at one point. So yeah, but why is it that when you look back on the past, it always looks daggy, but our old pictures look so daggy?
You were a fashion icon at the time. At the time, it was fabulous. Look, I know we have to wrap up soon. I just wanted to ask. I don't want to ask specifically about other job offers you might have received, but I'm going to assume that you've been made some lucrative offers to leave Seven for other projects. What's kept you together and staying at Seven?
Oh, the knowledge that we're at the right station for sure. The knowledge we're surrounded by a great news team. The current day knowledge, as we've had in the past too, that our news director Ray Cooper is fantastic. You know, this is the happiest newsroom I've ever seen, and it's always been a pretty happy newsroom.
Yeah.
But in the last 40 or so years that I've been here, this, without doubt, it's just the best newsroom. Everybody is talented and enthusiastic, and they've got this sense of pride of being a team that wins.
Yeah. Why would you want to go anywhere else?
Oh, for sure. Second last question, and it has to be asked. Any plans to retire, or do you still have many more years left?
No.
And the correct answer is many more years left.
Ask us in another 37 years. How's that?
Oh, beautiful. And you can try to equal Chuck Scarborough in NBC.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No plans at all. We're at the top of our game, at least we think so. So hopefully many more years to come.
100%. Through 37 years, through COVID, through triumph and tragedy, you guys have been a stable and steady force for the people of Perth. We're with you for 5 hours a week. What would you like to say? I mean, an opportunity just to say to the people of Perth, because I looked on the Mark McGowan's page, because he said congratulations, and there are over 1,000 comments on there of just people. It was just congratulations. Yeah, there's almost 1,000 comments there, and 99% are so supportive of you. I mean, I just feel like giving you a small opportunity just to say something back to the people of Perth.
I think we just say thank you. It's been and continues to be a great pleasure.
Yeah, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of Sue to say that we're very humbled by people watching us for so long. Yeah, we do try our very best to bring people, the best news in Perth, the whole news, nothing but the news. And, we're the messengers, and it's great that people watch, and we hope can say, now I know what's happened today.
Yeah. Look, we'll leave it there. Rick and Sue, you're absolute royalty and icons of Perth. You've steered the public through bushfires, tragedies, elections, sporting highlights and significant events that have shaped our history, and done that whilst being the #1 news service in Perth, which is in turn has bumped the entire network to #1 in this town, and I'm sure Kerry Stokes is really happy about that. You don't do too many of these podcasts and that sort of thing, so I super appreciate it. And it feels like it's almost celebrating the end. It's not. I mean, this is just a celebration of the Guinness World Record, which is fantastic. Many more years to come, which is a comfort to many people in Perth who are experiencing so much change at the moment. So it's a good, steady ship. Thanks, Rick and Sue.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks for being so insightful and nice.
Thank you.